From pristine coral atolls to frozen wilderness sanctuaries, and from volcanic island chains to the most isolated corners of our planet, some places aren't just breathtaking. They could be your lifeline when World War III erupts. But before you start Googling flights to Antarctica and planning to bunker down with the SEALs, here are the ultimate safe havens when civilization collapses. As global tensions reach a boiling point, World War III feels less like a distant nightmare and more like an inevitable reality. The US finds itself at odds with, well, practically everyone. Russia's three-day special operation has dragged on for years, while China rattles its sabers around Taiwan. Meanwhile, the Middle East remains a powder keg, with regional conflicts threatening to drag in superpowers. With diplomacy crumbling and alliances fracturing, the world teeters on the brink of catastrophe. And when that war comes, your survival might depend entirely on geography. The pristine beaches of Palau might seem like just another tropical paradise. But when the missiles start flying, what makes it worth considering as your escape route? If you're in the Pacific, you'll want to avoid the first island chain, stretching from Japan through the Philippines to Indonesia. This will be ground zero for the most brutal naval battles, as China must punch through this barrier to secure its supply routes and achieve its strategic objectives. The fighting would extend beyond this line too, thanks to China's massive arsenal of long-range missiles. Guam, Hawaii, and even the American mainland would face devastating attacks. First off, it's strategically irrelevant. Pull out a world map and examine the alliance networks surrounding the major powers. You'll notice most US treaty allies form a defensive perimeter around the Eurasian landmass, while the interior aligns with Russia and China. Now look at the flashpoints between these blocks. Stay away from the Korean Peninsula too, for reasons that should be obvious by now. But Palau sits well outside these primary conflict zones. While it maintains friendly relations with Washington, no one would object if this tiny nation declared neutrality. After all, its entire military consists of just 30 personnel, hardly a game-changing force. At over 500 miles from the Philippines, the nearest major battleground, Palau offers crucial distance from the chaos. So you have distance on your side. That's one major World War III survival category that Palau fulfills. What about the other? You'd feast like royalty in Palau's crystal-clear waters. The nation boasts some of the world's richest marine biodiversity, with over 1,500 fish species swimming in its waters. Local fishermen pull in yellowfin tuna, mahi-mahi, red snapper, and countless other species year-round. The surrounding reefs teem with lobsters, crabs, and other shellfish, over 700 species of coral, and 1,300 species of fish to choose from. But if you get tired of seafood, Palau has about 460 square kilometers of land to work with. The tropical climate supports coconuts, breadfruit, taro, and sweet potatoes. You can find bananas, papayas, and various vegetables growing in the rich volcanic soil. The locals even cultivate betel nut, which they use in traditional ceremonies, though you might want to stick to coconut water. Fresh water comes from natural springs and collected rainwater. The heavy tropical rainfall means you won't be going thirsty anytime soon. And Palau doesn't have resources that a belligerent great power would be interested in, at least at first. That qualification should give you pause. Palau isn't bulletproof as a hideout, so don't get too comfortable in that beach chair yet. If the conflict ends quickly, you'd probably never see action. But extended warfare changes the calculus dramatically. Look again at those island chains. If the US and allies hold the first island chain, you're golden. But if China and its partners break through significant portions of this defensive line, Palau suddenly becomes much more relevant. Further east lies the second island chain, and beyond that the third, running from Alaska's Aleutians down to New Zealand. Should the Allies fall back to these positions, Palau could find itself uncomfortably close to the new front lines. In a prolonged conflict, even Palau's modest resources become attractive. The nation has potential for phosphate mining, bauxite deposits, and its strategic position for monitoring Pacific shipping lanes might prove valuable to whoever controls the region. So while Palau offers excellent short-term safety, you might want an even more remote tropical alternative. How about the Cook Islands? And if you can, there's plenty to sustain you here. As you might have guessed, there's a lot of fish to go around in the Cook Islands. The nation's exclusive economic zone covers 690,000 square miles of pristine Pacific waters. That's 7,500 times larger than their land area. Skipjack and yellowfin tuna dominate the catch, but local waters also yield mahi-mahi, wahoo, marlin, and various reef fish. Traditional Polynesian fishing methods remain common, so you wouldn't need sophisticated equipment to feed yourself. On land, coconuts are everywhere, But the islands also grow breadfruit, bananas, papayas, and taro. Since there's fewer natural resources than some other places, your diet might not be as diverse as you'd like. We'll let you decide whether it's more important to have extra safety in exchange for a more limited menu. At least you won't worry about fresh water. The islands get plenty of rainfall, and many have natural springs. Plus, fewer resources means even less reason for warring powers to take interest in this place. But even the Cook Islands aren't completely off the annihilation chessboard. Their geography and political ties could put them in harm's way if things get messy. Though they're not a formal ally, they maintain close relationships with New Zealand and, by extension, the United States. They're also one of the countries that recognize Taiwan over the People's Republic of China, something that definitely doesn't sit well with Beijing. They're also just past the second island chain, so they're a bit of a weather vane for how the war would be going. If the Cook Islands stay peaceful, the strategy to contain China is probably working. If Chinese planes become routine sights in the skies and ships start moving around offshore, it's a sign that you should book passage to somewhere else. The last thing you'd want is to be trapped behind Chinese lines in World War III. If Chinese activity becomes routine near the Cook Islands, you could try retreating further south to Tasmania. On paper, this might not look like such a great choice. Tasmania is part of Australia, which is definitely a treaty ally of the United States. Even so, the island isn't likely to be a major target in the war. It has a small contribution to Australia's military. The island state has only about 540,000 people total. Even under wartime pressures, it wouldn't add much to the overall war effort. Sure, Tasmania could see a missile or two if there's a full mobilization. But if we were China or North Korea, we'd want to use those on more important targets. We'll explain more about that in a moment. It might sound strange, but the Australian mainland is more likely to get hit by those missiles than Tasmania is. Geography gives Tasmania some critical advantages. It's 150 miles southeast of the Australian mainland across the Bass Strait, putting it far from most conflict zones. Strategically, its main value would be as a fallback position if the mainland falls, something that's extremely unlikely given Australia's defensive capabilities and alliance support. So Tasmania passes the first test, despite its connection to a belligerent power. What about survival? The first thing you should know is Tasmania is agriculturally self-sufficient. The island produces beef, dairy products, lamb, and wool. Lots of wool. In 2022, there were about 2.4 million sheep on the island. Roughly 4 sheep for every person. That's not as impressive as New Zealand's ratio, but who's counting sheep during World War III? The abundant sheep mean ready protein and clothing materials. World War III would disrupt global supply chains completely, but at least you'd have warm clothes. The sheep are part of a broader agricultural sector that includes wheat, barley, oats, and various vegetables. Tasmania's cool climate and fertile soil support diverse farming, including apple orchards and vineyards. The island is also surrounded by water, which means plenty of fish. You can enjoy Atlantic salmon, abalone, rock lobster, scallops, and various other species. Tasmania's aquaculture industry could continue operating even during wartime disruptions. They're 1,500 miles northeast of New Zealand, so they'll be even further from any major battleground, at least in the war's opening phase. They also have most of the other things you'd want on a World War III survival list. Like Palau, they have no formal military alliances, so it's likely no one would mind too much if they suddenly declared neutrality, especially because they only have a population of 17,500 people spread across 15 tiny islands. The place covers just 92 square miles total, good for one of the smallest nations on Earth. So you better make sure you get along with your new neighbors. So what are the drawbacks? Aside from being connected to a major military alliance, Tasmania has some resources that a warring power might want. There's zinc, tin, and iron ore deposits. The island also has significant forestry resources. It's likely that a victorious China would demand access to these rather than occupy such a distant location. But stranger things have happened during total wars. Still, when it comes to the Pacific region, Tasmania is probably one of the safer places to be, especially if you don't mind cooler weather. But it's called World War III for a reason. Emphasis on world. With Russia involved, all of Eastern Europe would be a battleground. Anywhere east of Germany would face serious danger, and retreating west isn't necessarily the answer. Take out a map of Europe and you'll notice that geographical feature that's been important in too many European wars to count. There's a massive stretch of open territory spanning most of the continent, from the Pyrenees to the Urals. That's the European plain, and it gets wider as you go east. At the Urals, it spans over 1,200 miles from the Arctic Ocean to the Caspian Sea. Putin hates this geography, like every Russian leader before him. It means Russia has borders that are nearly impossible to defend effectively. Since geography shapes strategy, one of Putin's primary World War III objectives would be pushing Russian influence as far west as possible. Now, Russia's military struggles in Ukraine might make you doubt they could reconstruct the Soviet sphere of influence. But we've seen how Putin compensates for conventional weaknesses. Every major European city would be targeted by missiles and drones. The further east you are, the higher your chances of getting hit. But you shouldn't feel safe in London, Paris, or Madrid either. You could flee to the countryside, but anywhere in NATO could be targeted, especially near military installations. Even the American East Coast would face attacks. Russia has decades of experience planning missile strikes against targets in the continental United States. Most of Europe and the North Atlantic would be danger zones. But what about the Faroe Islands? Yes, they're technically part of NATO through Denmark, but their contribution to the alliance is minimal. The Faroes are 18 remote islands between Iceland and Norway with just 53,000 people. They don't have a military, just a coast guard with a few patrol boats. The islands have maintained a largely peaceful existence for over a millennium, mostly because staying neutral was the only way such a small territory could survive. As military targets go, the Faroes wouldn't attract much Russian attention. There are no significant military installations, no major industrial capacity, and limited strategic value. And there's plenty to survive on here. You might have guessed, there's lots of fish. The Faroe Islands have one of the world's most sustainable fishing industries. The pristine North Atlantic waters yield cod, haddock, salmon, herring, and mackerel. Fishing has been the economic backbone here for centuries, and traditional methods remain common. While you're watching missiles fly overhead elsewhere, you can enjoy some of the world's freshest seafood with a side of northern lights. Here's another great advantage. You won't need imported energy to cook that fish. The Faroes are moving toward energy independence through renewable sources. Hydroelectric power from the mountainous terrain provides most electricity, supplemented by wind power. The islands are experimenting with tidal energy too. By the time World War III starts, they might be completely energy self-sufficient. The islands also produce lamb and wool from sheep that graze the mountainous terrain. Root vegetables like potatoes, turnips, and cabbage grow well in the climate. While the harsh weather limits agriculture, the soil is fertile enough to support basic crops. So what are the drawbacks? Even though the islands themselves are mostly safe, there's one area that might attract unwanted attention. The Faroes sit along potential shipping routes between the Arctic and Atlantic. If the conflict escalates to full naval warfare, these waters could see increased military activity. Also, like Iceland, the Faroes could become relevant to the GIUK gap, that strategic line running from Greenland through Iceland to the United Kingdom. This was crucial during the Cold War for controlling Russian naval access to the Atlantic. If things go badly enough in Europe, Russian ships might find the Faroe Islands' position interesting for breaking NATO's maritime containment. But we don't think this is very likely. The Russian Navy hasn't exactly covered itself in glory lately. Just look at what Ukraine did to it in the Black Sea, and they don't even have a navy. Fighting NATO's combined naval power so far from Russian shores would be extremely challenging. So, while there are potential risks, the Faroes offer good safety margins for European refugees. If you're looking at the Western Hemisphere, you might think you're stuck with freezing Arctic hideouts, while people in the East get tropical paradises. Well, you're in luck. There are some excellent temperate options in the South Atlantic. The Falkland Islands might not sound appealing, but hear us out. These windswept islands in the South Atlantic are about as far from everywhere as you can get. Located 300 miles east of Argentina, the Falklands have a population of just 3,400 people spread across two main islands and hundreds of smaller ones. While technically British territory, they're so remote and strategically worthless that no major power would waste resources on them during a global conflict. The main settlement, Stanley, has about 2,100 people, hardly a priority target for anyone's missile inventory. Food won't be a problem here. The surrounding South Atlantic waters are incredibly rich. Patagonian toothfish, hake, various squid species, and other fish provide abundant protein. The seas also support large populations of seals and several penguin species. We're not saying you'd want to hunt them, but it's good to know they're available in extreme circumstances. On land, sheep farming dominates everything. The Falklands support about 490,000 sheep. That's roughly 140 sheep per person. You'll never run out of wool for clothing or mutton for meals. The islands also have small cattle herds and some hardy vegetables that grow despite the harsh climate. The Falklands generate their own electricity through wind power and diesel generators. With consistent, strong winds, renewable energy works well here. The infrastructure is basic but functional, and the community is tight-knit and self-reliant. The main drawback is obvious. The weather is brutal. Expect high winds, frequent rain, and temperatures that rarely exceed 60 degrees Fahrenheit even in summer. The growing season is short, and fresh vegetables are limited. But if you can handle the climate, few places offer better long-term isolation from global conflicts. Speaking of isolation, let's talk about the ultimate hideaway, Tristan da Cunha. This British territory sits in the middle of the South Atlantic, 1,500 miles from the nearest inhabited land. With just 250 residents, it's literally the most remote inhabited place on Earth. No military force would ever bother with Tristan da Cunha. It's simply too far away and offers nothing of strategic value. Supply ships visit only a few times per year, and there's no airport. If you can somehow get there, you'd be about as safe from global warfare as humanly possible. The tiny community is completely self-sufficient in basics. Residents grow potatoes and vegetables while fishing the surrounding waters. Everyone has multiple jobs. You might be the postmaster, teacher, and mechanic all at once. The island operates on principles of cooperation that would serve you well during global chaos. Reaching Tristan da Cunha requires serious planning. You can't just book a ticket, but if you can manage it, nowhere on Earth offers better isolation from world conflicts. Now let's head back toward more temperate climates. Uruguay presents an excellent South American option that balances safety with comfortable living. This small nation sits between Brazil and Argentina with no involvement in great power conflicts. Uruguay has maintained careful neutrality for decades and shows no interest in changing course. The country's military is small and defensive, clearly no threat to any major power. Uruguay's location provides excellent safety. It's thousands of miles from potential battlegrounds and offers no strategic value to warring nations. The country has stable democratic institutions, relatively low crime rates, and an educated population. What can you survive on here? Plenty. Uruguay is a major agricultural exporter with vast cattle ranches across rolling grasslands. The country produces some of the world's best beef, along with wool, dairy products, rice, wheat, and soybeans. The fertile Pampas region could feed the population several times over. The Rio de la Plata provides access to fresh water, and coastal areas offer decent fishing. Uruguay has also developed significant renewable energy infrastructure. Wind power generates most of the country's electricity, reducing dependence on imported fuels. Uruguay's wine industry produces excellent vintages too, so you won't have to give up all of life's pleasures while waiting out World War III. The drawbacks? Uruguay is more developed than some other hideaways, meaning it depends more on global trade. Economic disruptions could be more severe here than in places that are already largely self-sufficient. Also, being on a major continent means some small risk that conflicts could potentially spread to South America, though this seems very unlikely. If you want something even more remote, consider French Polynesia, specifically the Marquesas Islands. These volcanic islands sit 1,000 miles northeast of Tahiti, making them among the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. With just 9,000 residents spread across several islands, they're far too insignificant for any military attention. France would likely not object if they declared neutrality to avoid any potential targeting. The Marquesas offer outstanding survival prospects. The surrounding Pacific waters yield abundant fish, tuna, mahi-mahi, jack, and various reef species. Traditional Polynesian fishing techniques remain common, ensuring sustainable harvests even without modern equipment. The fertile volcanic soil supports breadfruit, coconuts, bananas, mangoes, and various vegetables. Many families maintain traditional gardens and preserve knowledge of living off the land. The mountainous terrain provides natural springs for fresh water. Most importantly, the Marquesas maintain traditional Polynesian culture and self-sufficiency practices that would prove invaluable during global disruptions. The community-oriented society and ancestral knowledge represent humanity's best survival strategies, refined over centuries of island living. The main drawbacks are limited modern medical facilities and the challenge of actually reaching such a remote location. But for long-term survival in a collapsed world, few places offer better combinations of safety, resources, and sustainable living practices. But here's the thing. We've been assuming conventional warfare or limited nuclear exchanges. If World War III goes full nuclear, all bets are off. Even the most remote paradise won't save you from nuclear winter, radiation fallout, and the collapse of global agriculture. In that nightmare scenario, proximity to prepared underground facilities, substantial food stockpiles, and medical resources becomes more important than tropical beaches. Switzerland's mountain bunkers, Norway's doomsday seed vault, and similar prepared facilities might offer better odds than any remote island. Countries like Switzerland have spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Every building has a fallout shelter, The military has stockpiled years' worth of supplies in mountain bunkers, and the infrastructure is hardened against electromagnetic pulses. If civilization collapses completely, you want to be near people who saw it coming and prepared accordingly. But assuming we avoid the worst-case nuclear scenario, these remote locations offer your best chances of riding out a conventional World War III. The key factors remain consistent: distance from major conflict zones, abundant natural resources, energy independence where possible, and stable local communities that can function without global supply chains. Remember the priorities. First, avoid the obvious target zones. Stay away from the island chains where the great powers will clash, avoid major military bases and industrial centers, and get as much distance as possible from nuclear-armed nations. Second, find somewhere with sustainable food production, fresh water, and preferably renewable energy. Third, look for communities with the social cohesion and local knowledge needed to maintain civilization when the global system breaks down. Some of these places might sound harsh or primitive compared to modern city life, but they offer something more valuable than comfort: survival. When supply chains collapse, when electrical grids fail, when governments fall, these remote communities will keep functioning because they never forgot how to live without the global system. The sheep farmers in the Falklands, the fishermen in the Faroes, the traditional gardeners in French Polynesia, they have skills that no amount of money can buy when the world burns. They know how to make clothes from wool, preserve fish for winter, grow food in harsh climates, and work together when times get tough. So choose your refuge carefully. Stock up on essential supplies before you need them. Learn some basic survival skills, and pray that cooler heads prevail before we have to test these theories for real. Because the best survival strategy for World War III is still preventing it from happening in the first place. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed this tour of potential World War III hideaways, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It really does help the channel grow. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.